So you see for the experiments PowerPoint slides here, there's not a whole lot, just one. I don't spend a whole lot of time on experiments. They're interesting, they're potentially very powerful and prove some good points, but I spend more time in this class, as you've noticed, on survey research and qualitative as well. Nonetheless, experiments, there's some good things here. Of all the ways that I think you'll find they're the best at determining cause and effect, you can control pretty much anything. If I wanted to know, for example, what effect room temperature has on student performance, I could randomly divide the class into two groups, present the materials the same way, same tone of voice, same you name it, except if group A has the room temperature at 72 and group B at 32, and if there's a difference in grades, the 72 temperature class doing better grades, I could conclude that temperature has an effect on grades. I know it sounds silly, but you get the point. You can control really anything you want in an experiment. Some problems here. External validity is what you find in your experiment true in the real world. In an experiment, you're doing stuff in a controlled setting, is what you find in that controlled setting really happening out there in the real world. You can prove it, it's just difficult to prove. Another potential problem is small sample size. It's tough to do experiments on large numbers of people, and so is what you find really generalizable to a larger population. And then Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect is when you're being studied, when you know you're being studied, you behave differently. I also like to call it sometimes the first date syndrome. Imagine on your first date, people put their better foot forward, opening doors and please, thank you, and third, fourth, fifth, 10th date is when you see what the person's really like. Now, I say that somewhat jesting, but there's a lot of truth there. The Hawthorne effect is if you know that you're being studied, you're probably going to behave a little bit differently than you normally would. So how do you overcome this problem? Well, you study people for a longer period of time, weeks, months, things like that. But if people know they're being studied, they behave differently. If the boss says to you, hey, we're having some problems and we're going to have someone come in and analyze what we're doing, if you know that maybe, say, your job is on the line, you'll probably do better work. Milgram experiment, a very, very famous experiment done at Yale University. A couple of things I want you to know. Well, again, what Stanley Milgram wanted to do back in the early 60s was see if people really would do what authority figures said, even if what the authority figure said was really wrong or bad. He got the idea based on a lot of things that went on in Germany during World War II. So males were recruited through newspaper ads in different areas of Connecticut, and men came in under pretense. They were pretty much lied to. They were told that they were there to perform an experiment on learning, when really they were there to have an experiment performed on them regarding obedience to authority. And so what you had is you had two people come in, one of whom was a Confederate, if you will. He was in, so the person was in on it. And there's only one person being studied, but the person who was being studied, again, thought it was an experiment on learning. So they both randomly drew a name out of a hat, and always inevitably the person on whom the experiment was really being done drew the slip that said teacher. That's just how they were able to rig it up. I think both slips in the hat actually said teacher. Nonetheless, the person who was the learner went in another room, and the teacher was instructed to read a series of words to the learner, and then in this series of words, the person had to correctly pair up one of those four words with some other word. And when the learner, who was again a Confederate in on the experiment, when the learner got the answer wrong, the teacher, the person who was being studied here, was asked to shock the person. There were 30 buttons on this machine, beginning at 15-volt increments, starting with 15 and ending with 450. And so Milgram wanted to see how much people would shock people if there was an authority figure there saying, go on, go on. And so you'll see shortly these three videos, a more recent experiment done in I think it was 2011. So this here was back in the 60s. And pretty much what Milgram found is that people are going to do what authority figures say to do, even if they don't think it's necessarily right. So, for example, what Milgram found is that 2/3 of the teachers, again, about 2/3, 65%, of those who were the teachers and had to shock the learners. 2/3 went all the way. They did all the buttons up to 450 volts. Now, the teachers were paid, so who knows if that played some role in it. Being paid, did that make them want to stay with the experiment the whole time? I don't know. And at the very beginning, the teachers were shocked. The only real shock that happened was the teachers got a little shocked. So they would supposedly have an idea of what the learners felt. But 2/3 of the teachers shocked the learners all the way up to the 450 volts. That's very interesting. Was this experiment ethical? Well, Milgram did debrief. Debriefing is when all is said and done, the teachers were told the truth. No, this really wasn't an experiment on learning. You were involved in an experiment on obedience. Was that really ethical? Well, that's debatable. So, but the thing is, you never know about research and ethics and such. I had a professor who did some research on marital happiness and the activities that couples did. And so he studied them and asked them about income and hobbies and you name it. He wanted to see what made couples happy. And at the end of the interview, and this is a more recent study by a professor I had in the, I think it was 1980s or 90s, somewhere around there. At the end of the interview, he left with each couple, they were married couples, he left with each couple a quick survey to fill out and mail in. And so for this one couple, the husband filled out his form, his survey, and went to put it on the counter. And he saw his wife's already there, filled out and ready to be mailed. And so he opened it up. And one of the questions was, if you had to do it all over again, would you marry the same person? And his wife checked no. Now, this is not something, his name was Dr. Holman. Dr. Holman didn't expect this to happen, but it did. You never know what problems your research will have when you study people. He did, oddly enough, he was not just a researcher, but also a marriage and family therapist. So he had to fly back out to wherever they were and play marriage and family counselor. Now you might say, well, he would have found out anyway that she didn't want to be married to him initially. You don't know that. You don't know that. Your research could really affect people's lives. Okay, the 3 videos here. Let's see if we go to our site. Here are the 3 videos here. Watch them in this order. The Milgram experiment first, applied the shock, and is society getting worse? Those are just some clips of the more recent study I referred to. And you'll see, for example, you could argue, yeah, things are getting worse because in, let's see, in Milgram's experiment, 1 in 6 refused to be part of the study. Today, I'm sorry, in Milgram's time, 1 in 3 refused to be part of the study. Today, it's 1 in 6. So there are a few people refusing to be part of the study. So 1 in 3 refused then, 1 in 6 refused now. In Milgram's experiment, as I mentioned, about 2/3 of the people shocked individuals all the way. It's about the same today. So you'll see some interesting stuff there when you see those videos. Anyway, experiments are interesting. Milgram's experiment suggests that sometimes people just blindly follow obedience, and so interesting food for thought. But let me know what questions you have. Talk to you later.